Hey there everybody, what's going on? Thanks for joining us today on Cinema Recap. So we're going to jump back to 2005 and check out the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Spoilers ahead. The story begins during World War II. An air raid is taking place, and bombs are being dropped over London. The main characters in this story are 4 children. From youngest to oldest, we have Lucy, Edmund, Susan, and Peter. Edmund's standing by the window watching the airplanes. His mother pulls him away, ordering the boys to get to shelter. Susan grabs Lucy, who's still in the bed, terrified. Before they can get to the shelter,
Wait! Dad!
Edmund runs back into the house for their father. Peter runs after him. Edmund grabs a picture of their father, who's fighting the war, and the two manage to get back to the shelter safely. Peter shouting at Edmund for being selfish, asking why he can't just do as he's told.
Why can't you just do as you're told?
All the while, Edmund clutches the picture of their father, and their mother hugs him. Sometime later, the kids are at the train station, being evacuated with a lot of other children. Edmund's complaining that if their father were there, he wouldn't make them leave. Peter replies that if their father were there, there'd be no war, and they wouldn't even have to go. The mother tells Edmund to listen to his brother, and Peter promises to look after his younger siblings. The mother hugs each of her children, and they make their tearful goodbyes. The 4 kids get on the train, each with a ticket visible on front of their clothes, like all the other children aboard the train, and then we see them all waving to their parents as that train departs. When the children are eventually dropped off, now in the countryside, they're approached by a woman in a carriage pulled by a horse. This is Mrs. McCready, who's going to be looking after them until the war's done. They really don't have a lot of luggage, saying it's just them. They get on the carriage and Miss McCready takes them back to what is their new home. McCready tells them pretty sternly they're not used to children in their house, which is large and spacious. She tells them the rules of the house.
There are a few rules.
And that night, the children try to settle in for their first night. Peter and Susan comfort Lucy, who's complaining about the bed being uncomfortable. Peter tells her how great it'll be here, how large the grounds are, and how tomorrow they can play outside. Well, tomorrow it kinda rains, so they all stay inside. Edmund and Susan pore over books to pass the time. Lucy suggesting to play hide and seek, and the other children agree, running away from Peter, who starts the count. Edmund and Susie hide, and Lucy finds a room, which is empty, save for a single wardrobe. It's covered by a big sheet. She smiles up at it before opening the door and stepping in. Inside we have some thick coats. She walks backwards, further and further, until she sees trees and snow. Well, she turns around fully and sees a whole new world. Beginning to explore, everything is just so beautiful. Lucy finds the single lamp in the middle of the clearing. She touches it and then hears movement around her in the trees. Mr. Tumnus appears. At first, the two are scared of each other and hide, but Lucy eventually steps out from behind the post and picks up the package Mr. Tumnus dropped. Lucy sees his fawn legs, and the two introduce each other. Lucy tells him that she's a girl, a human, and Mr. Tumnus says that they're in a place called Narnia. Lucy's like it's an awfully big wardrobe. Mr. Tumnus invites her to tea, and Lucy agrees, helping him to carry his parcels. Inside his home, it's all warm and cozy, and the two are talking about their fathers briefly, and how they both went to war. Lucy mentions Christmas, and Mr. Tumnus says that they haven't had Christmas in Narnia for 100 years. Lucy's shocked at that. No presents for 100 years? Mr. Tumnus explains that it's always winter, and never Christmas.
Always winter, never Christmas.
So he plays some music for Lucy while she's drinking tea. She begins to fall asleep, waking up sometime later to find Mr. Tumnus in the dark, and he confesses that he had told the White Witch of her presence, and that she's coming to capture her. So feeling guilty, he helps her escape. So Lucy returns back to the world where her siblings are now staying at. She rushes down the corridor, saying that she's all right.
It's all right! I'm back!
She finds that no time has passed at all in her own world. And Peter, who has finished counting, finds her. She explains that she was gone for hours and shows him the wardrobe, but now it just looks kinda normal. The two eldest are saying that they don't believe her, and Lucy gets upset. Edmund says that he believes her, but Peter argues with him, telling him that he's just making everything worse. So now everyone's upset with each other, and Lucy closes the door to the wardrobe. Unable to sleep that night, Lucy visits that cupboard again. This time, Edmund follows her. She steps into Narnia for the second time. Edmund, who tries to find her, steps in there as well. Now Edmund finds snow and the lamppost moments later. He's a bit cold and begins to wander around searching for Lucy, but instead is found by the White Witch, who uses her magic to make him a Turkish delight, a kinda sweet. The White Witch asks him to return with his siblings before leaving him in the snow. Lucy meets Edmund and they return back to their world, and the next day, while playing outside, they manage to break a window, running to hide from Mrs. Macready. They hide in the wardrobe, and all four of them find Narnia once more. Lucy takes them all to meet Mr. Tumnus, only to find his place has been ransacked. Peter pulls a notice that has been nailed to the wall. It reads that Mr. Tumnus has been jailed for treason by the Queen of Narnia. So the four of them go outside, where they meet a talking beaver, who knows Lucy by name.
Lucy Pevensey.
The beaver hands him a handkerchief Lucy gave to Mr. Tumnus previously, back to her. Mr. Beaver brings the four of them to his home, telling him the woods aren't safe at night. Here they meet Mrs. Beaver and are welcomed into their house with some food and drink. The four are told about the lion Aslan, who's returned from being away for a long while. He'll be waiting for the siblings at the stone table. Mr. Beaver then explains the prophecy, telling him that the two sons of Adam and the two daughters of Eve will help defeat the White Witch and save Narnia. Susan says that they were sent away so that they wouldn't get caught up in a war. Peter tries to leave, telling the Beavers that they're not the ones, and that there must be some kind of mistake, only to find that Edmund is missing. They try and stop him, but by the time they see him, he's already walking into that White Witch's palace. Not knowing what else to do, they ask the beaver to take him to meet Aslan. Meanwhile, inside the courtyard of the Ice Palace, Edmund finds the figures of many creatures frozen into stone. He's startled by a sleeping wolf, who speaks to him. Edmund explains who he is, and the wolf takes him to the throne room, where he meets the queen. She's kinda angry at him for not bringing his siblings with, but he tells her that he brought him halfway, telling her exactly where they are. The White Witch sends her scouts, a pack of wolves, to hunt them down.
You know what to do.
Edmund now realizing his mistake. The hut is surrounded by the wolves, who find a secret passage inside the house. The beavers and the siblings manage to escape, blocking the tunnel. Here they find more statues of frozen creatures, victims of the witch. A fox appears, another talking animal, and he agrees to help them escape the wolves. When the wolves manage to break through that barricade, they question the fox, who tells them that the fugitives ran north.
North.
The wolves run off to sniff him out, and the others get down from the tree. Shortly after, the fox leaves him, saying that Aslan himself had asked him to gather more troops. Peter says they don't want to go to war, only that they want their brother back. In the meantime, at the witch's palace, Edmund's in the dungeons, chained to the floor and shivering. He meets Mr. Tumnus inside the cell beside him, and he asks if Lucy's all right, but Edmund doesn't know. The White Witch appears, telling Edmund that her wolves could not find his siblings. Edmund tells the witch that Aslan has returned, and she sets off to find the others, Susan, Peter, and Lucy, still traveling with the beavers to the stone table where Aslan is meant to be. As they're walking across a frozen lake, they see a sleigh from a distance and begin to run, reaching the tree line and finding a place to hide. Mr. Beaver checks out the coast, telling the others to come out, and they see none other than Santa, who tells the siblings that hope is beginning to weaken the witch's power. He gives the three of them each a gift. Lucy gets a magical potion that will cure any injury, alongside a knife. Susan gets a bow and a sheath of arrows, alongside a horn to call for help. And Peter gets a beautiful sword with runes etched into the blade. Santa says long live Aslan and Merry Christmas before getting on his sleigh and just riding away. Susan, Peter, and Lucy, along with the beavers, make their way onwards, reaching the frozen lake, which is now beginning to break up as winter is coming to an end. The frozen wall of the lake begins to break, and Susan, Lucy, and Peter, who have become trapped in the middle of the river by the wolves, manage to escape on a piece of ice. Holding onto that sword Peter stabbed into the ice to keep him steady. The beavers escape safely with him, easily able to swim. The five manage to get back onto land, seeing a tree in bloom. The flowers, all pretty and pink, begin to blossom before their eyes. The three leave their coats behind, the air beginning to get a bit warmer now. They continue without him. While back at the waterfall, the witch, having reached the river, finds it flowing freely. All the ice has completely thawed. The wolves caught the fox, who deceived them, and the witch lifts her staff, preparing to turn the fox to stone. Edmund tries to save the fox, telling her where the others were heading, to the stone table where Aslan is building his army. So the witch thanks Edmund before turning the fox into stone anyways.
Thank you, Edmund.
Our other three heroes with the beaver have reached the palace the army's gathering at. The fields are green now, and there's a lot of different types of creatures gathered here, including human-shaped ones made out of flower petals. Peter, Susan, and Lucy look around in awe at the centaurs, cats, boars, fawn, bears, and other creatures as they all stare right back at them. They approach the red and gold tent, and Aslan steps out. Everyone bows to him. Aslan welcomes them all, but asks where Edmund is. Peter's explaining that Edmund was captured by the White Witch, and the beaver explains how, saying Edmund had betrayed him. Aslan and Peter are seen on a hilltop talking, looking at the shining castle in the distance, the Castle of Four Thrones, one of which Peter will sit as High King.
In one of which you will sit, Peter.
Aslan explains about the deep magic that rules over all those who live in Narnia, one that governs all their destinies. Peter then hears a horn sound, Susan's horn, and runs to find her and Lucy, having climbed a tree and now are trapped by two wolves. Peter kills one of them, and Aslan lets the other go, telling the others to follow him, saying that the wolf will lead them to Edmund. Aslan knights Peter, and when he rises, Peter is now known as Sir Peter Wolfsbane.
Sir Peter Wolfsbane.
Knight of Narnia. Back at the witches' camp, with an army made up of scary creatures like trolls, cyclops, minotaurs, and other beasts are preparing for war. The witch is going through the battle tactics with her general, a minotaur. Now Aslan's scouts rescue Edmund and bring him back to Aslan's camp. Edmund's reunited with his siblings. Aslan tells him there's no need to speak about what is past.
There is no need to speak to Edmund.
Peter tells the rest of them to go home while he stays to protect Narnia, but Lucy refuses to leave, and Edmund says he's seen what the White Witch can do and wants to help to make the wrongs right again. Susan decides to also stay, getting in some practice with her archery, while the brothers ride around on horseback and practice some sword fighting. Mr. Beaver rushes up to him, saying that the witch has demanded a meeting with Aslan and is on her way. When she arrives, the witch tells Aslan that they have a traitor in their midst, Edmund, and according to law, all traitors belong to her, and that Edmund shall be killed, as is tradition.
As is tradition.
Aslan agrees to talk to the witch alone, and they enter a sidebar tent together. Sometime later, the witch leaves the tent, and Aslan declares that the witch has renounced her claim on Edmund. But he really doesn't share all the information about that deal. In Edmund's place, Aslan has offered himself to be killed by the witch. And that night, Lucy and Susan watch Aslan walking away alone. They try to follow him, but he notices them. And instead of sending him away, he asks for some company. After a moment, he has to go alone, thanking them before saying goodbye. Susan and Lucy watch from a distance, hearing screeching sounds. They see the witch's monsters gathered at the stone table. Aslan is bound and his mane cut. He's dragged upon the stone table and killed by the witch. The witch's troops are then prepared for battle. Once the witch and all her creatures have left, Lucy and Susan approach Aslan, hugging him and crying as the mice chew through the rope that binds him. The trees see what's happened, and the petals move through the air, traveling back to camp, once again forming into a human-like shape, telling Peter and Edmund the grave news. Peter confirms this when he finds Aslan's tent is empty.
She's right.
Edmund tells Peter it's up to him now to lead the army, saying that Aslan believed he could. The centaur tells Peter that the witch's army is nearing, asking what are the orders. Both sides prepare for battle, and a griffin lands beside Edmund as he sits upon his steed, telling him that the witch's army is approaching, and their numbers and weapons are greater than their own. The centaur beside Peter replies that numbers don't win a battle.
Numbers do not win a battle.
The witch's army is seen in the distance, with her sitting upon a chariot pulled by polar bears. The two armies ready to fight, and the witch says to her general to kill them all, and that she has no interest in POWs. The armies charge at one another. The witch remains where she is as her army of werewolves, giants, hyenas, tigers, and all kinds of creatures move forwards. Peter's side begins their attack with hippogriffs dropping stones on their enemy. Peter and the centaur charge forwards, leading the army into a giant V formation, lowering their lances. The big cats take the lead. Peter lowers his helmet and the two armies clash. Back at the stone table, the two girls still remain beside Aslan. The sun is just beginning to rise, and Susan tells Lucy they should go. She tells Susan that she's cold, and she puts her arm around her. The two walk away, pausing to look back at Aslan one last time before leaving. Suddenly, a great crack appears in the steps, reaching back to the stone table, which is now in half. The two girls see Aslan standing tall and proud, and that mane is fully grown and healthy. Susan asks how this is possible, and Aslan replies that if the witch knew the true meaning of sacrifice, she might have prevented the deep magic differently. And when a willing victim who has committed no treachery is killed in a traitor's stead, well, the stone table will crack and even death itself will turn backwards. Right on. Suze tells Aslan that Peter and the others would have gone to war by now, believing Aslan to be dead. Lucy pulls her knife out, saying they have to help, and Aslan says they will, telling him to climb on his back.
Climb on my back.
He runs him across the land to the witch's palace, using magic to unfreeze everyone there. All of the creatures frozen by the witch appear at her palace once frozen, as the centaur does, the one fighting alongside Peter in the battle, who became frozen trying to fight the witch and defend Peter, who was dismounted. Now at the battle, Peter calls for them to withdraw but can't escape himself, as he's trapped in a fight now with a minotaur, and the white witch is approaching him. Edmund runs to save his brother from the witch, managing to destroy her staff but getting also injured. Peter and the witch duel it with swords. Aslan appears, roaring triumphantly, the queen not believing what she's seeing. So he joins the battle with reinforcements. The battle is won.
It is finished.
Aslan goes and saves Peter and then just kills the witch. Edmund over here, who's injured, is saved by Lucy's magic potion, and his siblings rejoice, embracing him. Aslan goes and unfreezes the others, and Lucy heals all those she can find. At the great castle, a celebration is held, and Aslan walks down the hall, with the two sons of Adam and the two daughters of Eve by his side. The four of them stand before the stone thrones, and Aslan announces each of them: Queen Lucy, the valiant; King Edmund, the just; Queen Susan, the gentle; and King Peter the magnificent. Each of them is given a crown carried by the beavers and placed upon their heads by Mr. Tumnus. They each sit on their thrones, and Aslan speaks. Once a king or queen of Narnia, always a king or queen. May your wisdom grace us until the stars rain down from the heavens. Everyone cheers, and everyone's happy. During the celebration afterwards, Aslan can be seen upon the beach, walking away from the castle. Tumnus tells Lucy not to worry and that Aslan will be back.
We'll see him again.
Saying that he's not a tame lion. Lucy starts getting emotional and Mr. Tumnus gives her back the handkerchief she gave him. What feels like a really long time ago. Years pass, and the four of them, now grown into adults, are riding through the forest upon horseback. They come across a lamppost. Peter says that it kind of looks familiar.
It's familiar.
Like it all came from a dream. They all stare at it, and Lucy rushes off, heading into the thick foliage of the woods, where it begins to get difficult to move. They begin to talk over each other, pushing and shoving. Susan sees a coat, and the four of them fall out of the wardrobe. Now as their younger selves once again, they fall on the floor confused, and are found by the professor, who approaches them with a ball, the one that broke the window. To the four siblings, that would have been years ago now. He asks them kindly what they're doing in the wardrobe, and Peter replies that he wouldn't believe them if they told him. The professor leans forward with a smile and says, "Try me." Thanks for chilling with us on the novel based off C.S. Lewis, written back in 1950. This movie was released in 2005, but there was a 1988 miniseries that also came out. Lucy was played by Georgie Henley, Edmund played by Skander Keynes, Susan played by Anna Popplewell, and Peter played by William Moseley. As always, till next time.